Winter in Grand Rapids, Michigan, has never known the slightest hint of mercy. A suffocating blanket of heavy gray-white snow lay nearly 2 feet deep across the timber beams of my lakefront cabin, and the bone-chilling air clung to the glass windows like a freezing shroud. It was a bitterly cold Wednesday morning. I was standing in the rustic wooden kitchen, a room I had meticulously built with my own 2 hands back in the summer of 1998, carefully pouring a rich, steaming stream of dark black coffee into my favorite ceramic mug. At precisely 8:15 a.m., the old landline telephone mounted awkwardly on the cedar wall suddenly burst into a sharp, demanding ring. The harsh metallic chime sliced through the quiet serenity of the room like a razor blade. I set the glass pot down and picked up the heavy receiver. "May I please speak with Mr. Arthur Sterling?" The voice on the other end belonged to a woman. Her tone was unnervingly flat, distant, and steeped in the practiced, clinical precision of a corporate legal representative. "My name is Sarah Jenkins, and I am a senior verification specialist with the Fraud Prevention Division at Chase Bank in downtown Detroit. I am calling to urgently verify a home equity line of credit in the amount of $65,000 that was approved online using your full Social Security number, home address, and personal credentials roughly 20 minutes ago." My hand froze in midair. The warm ceramic mug nearly slipped straight through my calloused fingers. "I never applied for any loan," I said, my voice dropping an octave, fighting with every muscle in my chest to keep the words from trembling. "I haven't taken out a line of credit in over 20 years. Sir, the digital application was submitted through our secure online portal using your verified SSN, your exact date of birth, and an IP address originating directly from the Wi-Fi network inside your residence," she replied, the rhythmic, relentless clicking of her computer keyboard echoing faintly over the line. "If you did not authorize this transaction yourself, we need to initiate an immediate..." Right at that exact second, the heavy wooden kitchen door swung wide open. Caleb, my 33-year-old son, strolled into the room. He was wearing a cozy hooded sweatshirt, holding a warm Starbucks cup he'd grabbed from town, his face lit up with a bright, entirely innocent smile. "Good morning, Dad. The snow out on the driveway is starting to freeze over pretty bad. Do you want me to head outside and salt the walkway for you?" I turned slowly and stared directly into my son's eyes. The hand he had casually tucked inside his sweatshirt pocket flinched ever so slightly. Through the thin fabric of his pocket, I caught a sharp, unmistakable glimpse of a soft blue glow. It was the screen of a secondary burner smartphone, flashing silently with a rapid sequence of incoming bank transfer confirmation notifications. Caleb took a step toward the counter, reached out with his free hand, and hit the power button on the wall-mounted television. He intentionally cranked the volume up to a deafening blast, letting a booming weather broadcast drown out the serious, urgent voice coming through my telephone receiver. In that fleeting 3-second window of absolute realization, my entire world shattered into pieces. A 62-year-old man who had successfully managed commercial construction sites for decades, who had gone toe-to-toe with the most ruthless contractors in the Midwest, was forced to confront a horrific truth. The most dangerous predators don't break into your house through a basement window in the dark. They walk right through your front door, call you Dad, and smile at you while buying you morning coffee. "Mr. Sterling, are you still on the line?" The voice in the receiver snapped me out of my trance. I looked up at the framed photograph of my late wife, Clara, resting above the marble fireplace mantel. In the picture, she was laughing, that radiant, timeless smile from 40 years ago when we laid the foundation of this home together. "I'm still here," I said quietly, never breaking eye contact with my son's unbothered expression. "Freeze that loan immediately. I will be at the bank branch in person." I hung up the phone. Caleb turned around, flashing another seamless, hollow smile. "Everything all right, Dad? Who was calling so early?" "Nothing to worry about," I lied softly, my expression as unreadable as the frozen lake outside. "Just another junk insurance call. Welcome to Dad's ultimate payback." Before we dive into how I dismantled this betrayal piece by piece, ask yourself this. If you discovered your own child was quietly trying to strip away your life's work, would you confront them instantly, or would you stay silent and engineer the ultimate trap? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. To fully comprehend how a father ends up backed into a corner by his own blood, you have to rewind the clock 3 months back. It was late October when the last golden autumn leaves were violently stripped from the oak trees around Lake Michigan, leaving the landscape barren and cold. Ever since my wife, Clara, lost her battle with cancer 5 years ago, this 3,000-square-foot timber home had felt less like a sanctuary and more like a quiet mausoleum. I had grown painfully accustomed to making coffee for one, staring across the kitchen island at an empty stool, and carrying on one-sided conversations with Clara's photograph on the mantel. Loneliness at 62 is an insidious, creeping illness. It doesn't kill you outright, but it erodes your natural defenses, making you desperately vulnerable to the subtle illusion of warmth and comfort. So, when Caleb called me from Chicago on a dreary Sunday afternoon, his proposal sounded like an unexpected lifeline. "Dad, you shouldn't be rattling around in that massive house all by yourself with winter coming on," Caleb had insisted over the phone, his tone dripping with protective concern. "Brooke and I were talking. What if we moved in with you for a few months? We could help you clear the snow, keep the fireplace roaring, handle the heavy chores, and save up for our own place in Grand Rapids at the same time." Caleb presented himself as a self-employed financial investment consultant. What I didn't know then, and what federal investigators would lay bare months later, was that my son was drowning in catastrophic debt. He had squandered every dime he owned on volatile cryptocurrency scams and was actively being hunted by ruthless, hard money lenders out of Cook County. 3 weeks later, a giant orange U-Haul truck backed down my gravel driveway. Stepping out alongside my son was his wife, Brooke, 31 years old. Brooke worked as a senior credit risk underwriter for a major Chase branch. On the surface, she was the picture of suburban composure, soft-spoken, impeccably dressed, and always eager to set the dinner table. But her 8 years of insider banking experience made her the cold, calculating architect behind the digital trap being built around me. For the first fortnight, their presence felt like an absolute blessing. Brooke prepared hearty pot roasts that filled the cold house with rich, forgotten aromas. Caleb mowed the lawn one last time before the frost, fixed the loose gutters on the garage, and sat beside me watching football on Sunday afternoons just like he used to when he was a boy. The silence that had weighed on my chest for 5 years was suddenly gone. I genuinely believed I was the luckiest widower in Michigan. However, unchecked trust is the precise moment where foolishness takes root. The subtle mechanics of control began under the noble guise of convenience. One crisp November morning, as I reached for my heavy coat to walk down the icy drive to the roadside mailbox, Brooke gracefully stepped into my path with a bright, disarming smile. "Let me grab the mail for you from now on, Dad," she insisted, jingling her car keys. "The drive is pure ice, and I'm heading out past the box anyway. There's no reason for you to risk a fall. I've been fetching my own mail for 20 years, Brooke," I replied with a slight chuckle. "Well, consider it our way of making your life easier," she said smoothly, slipping out the heavy oak door before I could protest. What I had no way of knowing was that Brooke had already executed her first tactical strike. Utilizing my full social security number and personal identifiers, she had secretly registered my home address for the United States Postal Service's informed delivery feature. Every morning at 5 a.m., a high-resolution digital scan of every piece of mail scheduled to arrive in my physical box was delivered straight to her private email. Long before I even put my slippers on, Brooke knew exactly which bank statements, tax assessments, or credit notices were en route. She intercepted the physical paper mail at the curb, shredding sensitive financial notices in a portable document burner she kept hidden in the trunk of her car. To tighten the vice even further, Caleb took my smartphone one evening under the pretense of updating the operating system for senior safety. Beneath that benevolent lie, he installed a stealthy GPS tracking app and mirrored my text messages directly to a secondary burner phone hidden in their upstairs bedroom. They didn't just breach my privacy, they stripped away my digital visibility entirely. Sitting in my favorite recliner, listening to my family laugh upstairs, I was completely blind to the fact that my own home was being systematically dismantled from the inside out. As the winter frost tightened its icy grip on Lake Michigan, my house became a stage, and my son and daughter-in-law performed their roles with terrifying perfection. To any outsider looking in through our snow-dusted bay windows, we were the picture-perfect American family. Brooke threw herself into the role of the devoted, dutiful daughter-in-law with an unsettling enthusiasm. She hummed softly in the kitchen every evening, wiping down the quartz countertops until they gleamed, preparing rich pot roasts, creamy casseroles, and hearty soups, comfort foods that filled the drafty hallways with delicious aromas I hadn't smelled since Clara passed away. Caleb, meanwhile, played the tireless, dutiful son. He spent his mornings out in the biting cold, pretending to inspect the roof gutters, clearing snow from the porch and servicing the basement furnace so the house stayed warm. Whenever I offered to help, he would gently pat my shoulder, force a warm smile, and say, "Take it easy, Dad. You spent 32 years working on construction sites. Let your son handle the heavy lifting for once." It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. They showered me with just enough affection and domestic comfort to keep my mind numb, my guard down, and my instincts thoroughly asleep. However, a lie maintained with such desperate intensity is bound to show its cracks eventually. The illusion shattered completely on a bitterly cold Tuesday afternoon in mid-December. I had laid down on the living room sofa for my usual afternoon nap after helping Caleb stack firewood out back. My body was exhausted, but my mind remained restless. I was drifting in that translucent state between wakefulness and light sleep when I heard muffled, agitated footsteps halting just outside the hallway archway, barely 10 feet from where I lay perfectly still under a heavy wool blanket. It was Brooke and Caleb, whispering in sharp, panicked gasps. "Are you sure he's completely out?" Brooke hissed, her usual sweet, melodic voice replaced by a cold, jagged edge that sent a wave of ice through my veins. "He's out cold," Caleb whispered back nervously, his boots shifting on the hardwood floor. "He worked outside for 2 hours. He won't wake up until dinner." "He better not," Brooke snapped, her voice trembling with a mixture of malice and desperation. "I can't risk him wandering down to the kitchen again like he did last Thursday while I'm scanning his documents. That's why I've been lacing his evening chamomile tea with a mild liquid sedative every single night. Just a few drops to make sure his old body stays dead to the world after 8 o'clock. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird, but I forced my breathing to remain slow, heavy, and rhythmic. I didn't move a single muscle. "Did you get the rest of the tax returns?" Caleb asked, his voice shaking. "Yes," Brooke whispered hurriedly. "While he was out cold last night, I took his master key, opened the filing cabinet in his den, and photographed his last 3 years of federal tax returns, his land deeds, and his primary liquid bank statements. I've already uploaded his complete financial profile to the underwriters. His credit score is immaculate, above 800. We can leverage at least 200 grand against this property before he ever catches on." "What if he notices the papers were moved?" Caleb asked, a tremor of cowardice in his words. "He won't notice anything," Brooke snapped quietly. "He thinks we're his angels. He's an old lonely man who trusts his son blindly. Stop acting like a coward, Caleb. This house is our only ticket out of the hole you dug us into in Chicago." Their footsteps faded as they moved quietly down the hall toward their bedroom, the soft click of their door closing behind them like the locking of a vault. I lay there on the sofa in the freezing silence of my own living room, staring at the ceiling as tears of pure, unadulterated betrayal welled in my eyes. The chamomile tea Brooke had lovingly served me every night with a warm smile. The tea I had gratefully swallowed while thanking her for her kindness had been poisoned with drugs to keep me unconscious while they systematically plundered my life's work. They weren't just stealing my money. They were violating my body, my mind, and my sanctuary. Sitting up slowly in the quiet room, I wiped my face, looked at Clara's picture, and felt something cold and hard crystallize inside my chest. The grieving, trusting father died right there on that couch. In his place stood a man ready for war. If my son and his wife thought they were executing their stealthy financial assault in total isolation, they had completely forgotten about Hank Miller. Hank lived directly across the narrow gravel road that ran along the frozen edge of our property. At 67, Hank was a retired U.S. Marine Corps veteran who had spent 3 decades working as a master diesel mechanic in West Michigan. 30 years in uniform and a lifetime of reading men in high-stress situations had given him an uncanny ability to spot anomalies that ordinary civilian eyes completely missed. He was a man of very few words, but when Hank spoke, you listened. It was a freezing Thursday morning in late December when Hank crossed the snow-packed road, his heavy work boots crunching loudly against the ice. I was standing near the edge of my woodpile, pretending to check the dry pine logs, still reeling from the horrific discovery that my evening tea was being laced with sedatives. Hank stopped by the wooden fence line, his weathered, wind-chapped hands tucked deep into the pockets of his canvas Carhartt jacket. He didn't offer a cheerful morning greeting. Instead, his piercing steel-gray eyes scanned my porch before locking onto mine with intense focus. "Artie," Hank began, his gravelly voice dropping to a low, cautious rumble that barely carried past the fence. "We've been neighbors for 25 years. You know I don't stick my nose where it doesn't belong. But something is deeply wrong over at your place, and if I don't tell you, I won't be able to sleep tonight." My stomach tightened into a hard knot. "What is it, Hank?" Hank leaned slightly over the top rail, his breath blooming in thick white clouds in the biting sub-zero air. "It started 3 nights ago. Around 2 in the morning, I was up checking my generator. I saw a dark sedan, a late-model Lincoln with tinted windows in Cook County, Illinois plates, cruising down our road with its headlights completely turned off. It rolled past your driveway at a crawl, idled near your mailbox for 2 minutes, and then sped off into the dark. That wasn't a lost tourist, Artie. That was someone checking a perimeter or waiting on a drop. A cold chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the Michigan wind. Cook County was Chicago, where Caleb's shadow debts were hanging over his head. That's not all," Hank continued, his tone hardening with a terrifying gravity. "Last Tuesday, during that heavy blizzard at midnight, I looked out my front window. I saw your daughter-in-law, Brooke, walking out to your metal barrel behind the garage in her snow boots. She was carrying a thick stack of mail envelopes. I caught the distinct blue Flagstar Bank logo on top under my floodlights. Artie, she didn't just throw them away. She splashed lighter fluid into the metal drum, struck a match, and stood there in the freezing snow watching those bank statements burn until they turned to black ash. Why is your son's wife burning your official bank correspondence in the middle of a blizzard at 2 a.m.? The confirmation hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Every piece of the puzzle was locking into place with horrific clarity. Hank reached deep inside his heavy coat pocket and pulled out a small, heavy black object no larger than a box of matches. He reached across the fence and pressed it firmly into my trembling palm. "This is a high-definition magnetic dash cam with an infrared night vision lens and a 12-hour continuous battery," Hank whispered, squeezing my hand tightly. "I use it on my tractor, but you need it more than I do right now. Hide it inside your living room or near your desk. Stop relying on your gut, Artie. You need hard, unshakable evidence before those two vultures completely strip the meat off your bones." I looked down at the tiny black lens resting in my hand, then up at my old friend. For the first time in 3 months, I didn't feel completely alone in the dark. Hank gave me a single, firm nod, turned on his heel, and trudged back across the snow toward his house. I slipped the hidden camera deep inside my coat, turned toward my front porch, and prepared to play my role in this nightmare for just a little longer. By early January, the psychological cage my son and daughter-in-law had built around me was drawing dangerously tight. The illusion of peaceful cohabitation had withered away entirely inside my heart, replaced by a cold, watchful vigilance. Armed with the hidden infrared camera Hank had given me, I maintained my composure, waiting for the precise moment when their hidden machinery would fully expose itself. That moment arrived on a freezing Monday morning, just as the bitter Midwest wind whipped frozen snow against the kitchen panes. I sat at the wooden dining table with my tablet, intending to perform my routine monthly check on my primary savings account, the modest nest egg I had accumulated over 32 years in the construction industry. I typed in my username and password, keys I had memorized for a decade. A bright red error banner flashed across the screen. "Access denied. Invalid credentials or unrecognized security token." I carefully re-entered the information, ensuring every character was precise. The result was identical. A sharp pulse of panic flared in my chest. I called out into the living room where Caleb was lounging on the sofa, scrolling lazily on his phone. "Caleb, my online banking login isn't working," I said, keeping my tone mild, sounding like a confused old man struggling with modern technology. "It says my security token was updated." Caleb barely looked up, tossing out an offhand, perfectly practiced explanation. "Oh, don't worry about that, Dad. Flagstar and Chase updated their regional digital security protocols last week. They automatically migrated all accounts to multi-factor smartphone authentication. The system automatically routes the single-use OTP codes to my mobile number now, so you don't have to deal with those annoying text messages. Everything's completely safe." "You changed my security phone number without asking me?" I asked, leaning forward slightly. "It's just easier this way, Dad," he replied with a smooth, patronizing smile. "You always forget your passwords anyway. Let us handle the digital headache." He was locking me out of my own accounts in broad daylight, offering me a smile while severing my access to my life's savings. I swallowed my rage, nodded quietly, and pretended to accept his lie. The true, horrifying depth of their conspiracy was revealed later that evening. Around 11:30 p.m., I had poured out the evening chamomile tea Brooke had prepared for me down the bathroom drain, staying completely awake in the dark. The house was dead quiet, save for the faint creaking of the timber walls settling in the freezing cold. I quietly crept out of my bedroom in my socks and positioned myself near the top of the dark stairwell. Listening down in the lower study, Caleb was pacing back and forth. His voice was no longer smooth or confident. It was jagged, strained, and dripping with raw terror. "You have to give me 2 more weeks, Leo." Caleb pleaded into his phone, his voice shaking violently as he argued with a Chicago hard money lender. "I swear to God the money is coming. We've already maxed out 4 high-limit credit cards in his name. That's 80 grand right there. We just cleared the second personal equity loan, bringing the total debt tied to his SSN to 180,000. A heavy pause followed as the voice on the other end spoke. Caleb began hyperventilating. "Listen to me," Caleb whispered desperately. "The trap is almost set. Once the total fraudulent debt hits 200 grand next week, we hit the old man with the news. We'll present it like a sudden financial catastrophe. Tell him hackers stole his identity and ruined his credit. He's 62, retired, living on a fixed pension. He won't be able to service $180,000 in sudden debt. He'll panic. The house is worth at least $950,000 on the current market, completely paid off. We'll graciously offer to manage the liquidation of the property to save him from bankruptcy." Another pause, followed by Caleb's sickening, hushed laughter. "Once the house sells for 900 grand, we pay off your $180,000 principal plus interest. Brooke and I take our $500,000 cut, and we disappear to Atlanta by the spring," Caleb continued, outlining his monstrous grand design. "And what about my dad? Easy. We use the remaining tiny fraction of the house, proceeds to drop him into a cheap, state-run assisted living facility in Ohio. He'll be out of the way, isolated, and he'll spend the rest of his life thinking we saved him from ruin. He trusts me completely, Leo. The old fool doesn't suspect a single thing. Standing in the dark hallway above, clutching the wooden banister until my knuckles turned white, I felt the last shred of my paternal leniency burn away to ash. My own flesh and blood wasn't just stealing my money. He was planning to sell my sanctuary, destroy my sanity, and dump me in an obscure nursing home to rot alone in the dark. I quietly retreated to my bedroom, locked the door, pulled out a notepad, and wrote down 2 words in the dark. Total war. The freezing rain that swept through downtown Grand Rapids on Friday morning matched the icy resolve taking root inside my chest. I had left the house early under the pretense of picking up a replacement air filter for the furnace. Instead, I drove my truck straight to the main financial district on Pearl Street. My son and his wife believed that in this modern age, shutting an old man out of a smartphone app meant rendering him completely helpless. They had forgotten one fundamental truth born of my 32 years in business. Digital records can be manipulated, erased, or hidden behind altered passwords, but paper authenticated with physical ink carries the unyielding weight of the law. I walked past the automated ATMs in the lobby of the Flagstar Bank branch and requested a private meeting with the branch manager. Sitting in a quiet, glass-walled office, I requested certified, hard-copy paper statements for every financial account associated with my Social Security number, checking, savings, lines of credit, and home equity loans, stamped with official bank seals. 20 minutes later, the manager returned with a thick manila folder. As I flipped through the pages, the paper reality of my son's betrayal unfolded before my eyes. 4 credit cards opened without my knowledge, 3 personal loans, and 2 home equity applications. The total fraudulent debt logged against my name stood at a staggering $180,000. My hands were perfectly steady as I tucked the certified folder into my coat. The time for grieving had passed. The time for execution had arrived. From the bank, I drove directly to the law office of Evelyn Vance on Monroe Avenue. Evelyn was an elite 54-year-old attorney specializing in complex financial crimes and elder financial exploitation. 10 years prior, she had drafted Clara's will and established our family trust. She knew my character, she knew my family history, and she possessed a sharp, razor-edged intellect that cut through deception like a scalpel. I sat in her mahogany-paneled office overlooking the frozen Grand River and laid everything out on her desk. The certified bank records, the hidden infrared camera footage Hank had supplied showing Brooke burning mail in the snow, and a detailed, handwritten log of every conversation I had overheard through the floorboards. Evelyn listened in absolute silence, her expression hardening with every piece of evidence I presented. When I finished, she didn't just offer legal advice, she picked up her private phone line. "Arthur, what you are holding isn't just a domestic dispute," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with lethal calm. "This is a calculated, systematic financial execution. And because of Brooke's position at Chase, this crosses into high-level federal jurisdiction." Evelyn connected us directly with Special Agent Marcus Vance at the FBI field office in Detroit. Over a 2-hour conference call, federal agents cross-referenced my Social Security number against internal banking audit logs. What they discovered elevated the nightmare into a federal crime of terrifying proportions. Brooke had abused her insider credentials at Chase Bank to illegally access my complete internal financial profile, credit history, and tax records no fewer than 12 separate times from her workplace computer. Every single query was logged with her unique employee ID timestamp. Federal investigators confirmed this was a flagrant criminal violation of the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, a federal offense carrying mandatory prison time for insider bank fraud and aggravated identity theft. "Mr. Sterling," Agent Vance's stern voice echoed through the speakerphone. "We have enough to arrest them on state charges right now, but if you want federal charges that carry ironclad, non-negotiable prison sentences, we need the complete pattern. There is a final fraudulent loan transfer of $40,000 currently pending approval in their pipeline. We need you to go back to that house, maintain your composure, and play the role of the clueless, trusting father for just a little longer. Let them think their trap is working until that final loan disperses. Once that digital paper trail is complete, the federal trap will snap shut around them forever." I looked at Evelyn, then out at the gray Michigan sky. I was being asked to return to the den of wolves, to drink their tea, to smile at their jokes, and to pretend I knew nothing while my own son calculated my ruin. "I'll do it," I said quietly, leaning across the desk. "I played the fool for 3 months. I can play him for a few more days. If Caleb and Brooke believed they were the only ones orchestrating a silent real estate takeover, they were dead wrong. While they waited greedily for the final fraudulent loan to disperse, I put my own counteroffensive into motion. They thought the $950,000 lakefront home where I had lived for 25 years was an easy target waiting to be liquidated to satisfy their debts. What they didn't realize was that a man who spent 3 decades managing commercial construction projects knows far more about property deeds, private transactions, and asset protection than 2 arrogant amateurs ever could. On a freezing Tuesday morning, while Caleb and Brooke were away in downtown Grand Rapids under the guise of job interviews, I drove out to a quiet coffee shop 8 miles away in East Grand Rapids. Sitting in a secluded corner booth was Belinda Frost, a 52-year-old boutique real estate broker specializing in high-end, off-market residential acquisitions. Belinda didn't operate through public listings, Zillow, or Realtor.com. She catered exclusively to high-net-worth private investors, corporate executives, and discreet buyers who demanded absolute anonymity. I laid out my single condition on the table. The sale had to be entirely off the books, completely invisible to public web scrapers, and closed with lightning speed. Arthur, I've worked with Evelyn Vance for over a decade. So I know the stakes here, Belinda said, opening her leather portfolio. I have a couple on my private priority list, Major Thomas Harris and his wife, Sarah. Thomas is a recently retired U.S. Army veteran who just relocated to West Michigan to take a defense consultancy role. They've been looking for a secluded timber home on Lake Michigan for 6 months. They have liquid capital, they aren't looking for a bargain, and most importantly, they value privacy above all else. By Thursday afternoon, while Caleb was out grabbing takeout, Belinda arranged a silent, private walkthrough while the house was empty. The Harris family fell in love with the property the second they stepped onto the snow-dusted back deck overlooking the frozen lake. They didn't see an asset to be exploited. They saw a sanctuary where they could raise their 2 young children. 24 hours later, Belinda delivered their official response. An all-cash offer of $920,000, waiving all mortgage contingencies, with a strict 10-day expedited closing timeline. My hand didn't shake for a second as I signed the preliminary purchase agreement. The very house my son planned to steal and force me out of was officially slipping through his fingers, and he had no idea the ground beneath his feet had already turned to dust. To ensure that not a single penny of the $920,000 house proceeds could ever be touched, tracked, or frozen by Caleb's pending bankruptcy or legal maneuvers, Evelyn Vance established a airtight revocable living trust at an independent private credit union 40 miles away in Holland, Michigan. This financial institution had 0 ties to Chase or Flagstar Bank, completely bypassing Brooke's digital reach and insider database queries. All future bank statements were assigned to a newly rented private P.O. box in a neighboring county, secured with physical keys that never entered my house. Every cent from the upcoming sale, along with my monthly construction pension and life savings, was legally transferred into the protective shell of the Sterling Living Trust. Under Michigan law, the assets held within this specific trust structure were completely shielded from unauthorized third-party claims, debts incurred by family members, or fraudulent power of attorney attempts. I walked out of the credit union into the crisp winter sunlight with a brand new debit card and a set of temporary checks that existed completely outside my son's realm of awareness. Caleb and Brooke thought they were playing a high-stakes game of chess, maneuvering me toward ruin while I sat quietly in my armchair sipping tea. They were so blinded by their own greed and arrogance that they failed to realize I had already dismantled the board, sold the venue, and placed their names directly into a federal indictment file. The trap was set, the money was safe, and the clock was ticking down to their ultimate undoing. By mid-February, the tension thick inside my timber home had reached an absolute boiling point. Caleb and Brooke moved through the hallways with a quiet, arrogant swagger, convinced their grand scheme was entering its final, triumphant phase. On a gloomy Thursday morning, as freezing rain beat rhythmically against the glass, Caleb sat down across from me at the breakfast table, wearing a practiced expression of dutiful professional enthusiasm. "Dad, Brooke and I have to head out to Chicago for a 4-day financial conference," Caleb announced, casually spreading cream cheese onto a bagel. "It's a huge opportunity for my firm. We're leaving Sunday morning and we'll be back Thursday evening. You'll be all right here alone for a few days, right?" "I've been taking care of myself for 62 years, Caleb," I replied softly, sipping my black coffee. "I'll manage just fine." Across the table, a swift, triumphant glance passed between Caleb and Brooke, a silent, treacherous language I had learned to read with chilling clarity. What they didn't know was that FBI Special Agent Vance had already alerted me to their movement. This 4-day trip to Chicago wasn't a professional conference. It was a calculated attempt to establish an ironclad geographic alibi. They planned to let the final fraudulent loan disburse while they were out of state, return home on Thursday night pretending to be completely oblivious, and then discover the staggering $220 debt load to force me into liquidating the house, On Monday morning, exactly 24 hours after their rental sedan disappeared down the snow-covered driveway, my credit monitoring system chimed. The final pending $40,000 loan had cleared, transferring directly into the fraudulent shell account Brooke had created. The paper trail was complete. The federal crime was fully committed. The trap had officially sprung shut behind them. And while my son was raising a glass in a downtown Chicago hotel, celebrating what he believed was the destruction of his father's life, I executed my own plan with ruthless, methodical precision. I spent Monday morning carefully packing what truly mattered. I wrapped Clara's reading chair, her vintage porcelain teacups, my father's antique wall clock, and every photograph of our 43 years together in heavy moving blankets. Those cherished items were loaded into a climate-controlled transport van bound for my newly leased apartment overlooking the Chicago River, a quiet, secure sanctuary paid for with funds held safely inside my secret Sterling Living Trust. At precisely 1 a.m., a professional moving crew I had hired arrived at the front porch. For the next 5 hours, under my direct supervision, they cleared out every single item belonging to Caleb and Brooke. Their clothes were neatly folded, their books wrapped, their expensive shoes boxed, and their wedding photographs cushioned in heavy bubble wrap. 4 dozen heavy-duty cardboard boxes were packed, taped, and hauled away to a secure U-Haul self-storage facility 3 miles down the road. I prepaid 6 full months of storage rent in cash, placed the storage keys in an envelope, and made sure their property was handled with complete respect. I wasn't driven by petty malice. I was asserting absolute, unshakable boundaries. By 5 p.m., the house was utterly empty of their presence, echoing with a quiet, solemn stillness it hadn't known in months. Finally, Dale Preston, a licensed master locksmith, arrived in his work truck. Within 45 minutes, Dale removed every traditional deadbolt and replaced them with heavy-duty commercial smart locks, rekeying every entry door and installing digital keypads that required biometric fingerprints or newly generated security pins. "All set, Mr. Sterling," Dale said, handing me the single master keycard. "Unless someone has a battering ram or a SWAT team, nobody is getting through these doors without your permission." I stood on the front porch as dusk settled over the frozen expanse of Lake Michigan. The house where I had raised my son stood dark and quiet, ready for Major Thomas Harris and his young family to take possession on Friday morning. I locked the front door, set the new alarm system, and drove away into the gathering winter twilight. Caleb and Brooke were returning in 48 hours, expecting a helpless old man waiting to be crushed. Instead, they were walking blindly into an empty fortress, a revoked life, and a federal indictment. Thursday evening arrived in West Michigan, accompanied by a howling, relentless blizzard. Thick, heavy flakes of snow swirled furiously across the frozen gravel driveway of the lakefront home, burying the tire tracks of the past 4 days in a sea of white. At precisely 6:30 p.m., a sleek black rental sedan pulled up to the porch, its headlights cutting bright yellow beams through the blinding storm. Caleb and Brooke stepped out into the biting sub-zero cold, clutching their leather luggage, their faces lit with a quiet, arrogant satisfaction. They had just spent 4 days in Chicago celebrating what they believed was the seamless completion of their masterstroke. The final fraudulent $40,000 loan had cleared, bringing the total debt tied to my Social Security number to a crushing $220,000. In their minds, they were walking back into a house occupied by a clueless, fragile old man, a father they were ready to back into a corner, shock with fake financial ruin and manipulate into selling his home to save his son. Smiling warmly, Caleb stomped the snow off his boots, climbed the porch steps, and slipped his brass house key into the lock. It didn't fit. He frowned, jiggled the key, pulled it out, and tried again. The key mechanism didn't even budge. Confused, he looked closer and realized the old deadbolt was completely gone, replaced by a sleek, industrial-grade commercial smart lock, glowing with a harsh red LED indicator. "What the hell?" Caleb muttered, his confident demeanor flickering. "Did the old man manage to break the lock while we were gone?" He reached out and punched in his usual 4-digit security pin on the digital keypad. A sharp, loud error tone beeped 3 times through the freezing air. "Access denied." "Let me try," Brooke snapped impatiently, pushing him aside. She tapped her own phone against the smart sensor, attempting to override the lock via Bluetooth. The screen immediately flashed an ominous notification. "Device unrecognized. Property owner authorization required." Before Caleb could knock, the heavy oak door slowly swung inward. But it wasn't a 62-year-old widower standing in the doorway. Standing tall in the warm entry hall was Major Thomas Harris, 6'2", broad-shouldered, wearing a dark military sweatshirt. Behind him, the living room was filled with moving boxes, and his pregnant wife, Sarah, could be seen carefully unpacking kitchenware. Thomas looked at the 2 shivering figures on his porch with a cool, sharp scrutiny. "Can I help you folks?" Thomas asked, his voice steady, deep, and completely commanding. Caleb froze, his jaw dropping open. What are you doing in my father's house? Where is Arthur Sterling? Thomas didn't flinch. This isn't your father's house. My wife and I purchased this property in an all-cash transaction through an off-market trust 10 days ago. Closing was finalized this morning, and full legal possession was transferred to us. You're trespassing on private property. Caleb's face went entirely ghost white, his eyes wide with absolute, unadulterated horror. His hands began to shake violently as he stumbled backward. It was right then that Brooke's eyes caught a stark white envelope taped firmly to the glass window pane beside the new lock, marked with my handwriting in bold, dark ink. Caleb and Brooke, with trembling fingers. Brooke snatched the envelope, tore it open, and pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. The cold wind whipped the paper as her eyes scanned my handwritten words. Caleb and Brooke. I have known about everything since the 4th month. From the moment the bank fraud division called me about the first unauthorized loan. I heard every word you spoke through the floorboards. I know about the sedatives in my tea, the burned bank statements in the barrel, and the $220,000 in debt you tried to pin on my name. This house has been legally sold, and every single penny of the proceeds sits safely inside an untouchable private trust beyond your reach. Your personal belongings have been neatly packed by professional movers and placed in a secure U-Haul storage unit 3 miles away. The rental fee is prepaid for 6 months, and the keys are inside this envelope. I am not doing this out of petty vengeance, but out of self-preservation and dignity. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit has been handed complete digital evidence, including Brooke's 12 illegal bank database breaches and the video footage of burned mail. Federal agents will be waiting to speak with you both. I am still your father, Caleb. That truth will never change. But love does not mean allowing yourself to be destroyed by the people you raised. Arthur Sterling. The paper slipped from Brooke's fingers, fluttering away into the howling snowstorm. Her knees buckled under the crushing weight of reality, and she collapsed outright onto the snow-covered wooden porch steps, sobbing hysterically into her hands as 8 years of her banking career and her freedom evaporated in a single second. Caleb lost his mind entirely. Screaming in pure panic, he dropped his luggage and sprinted down the porch steps toward his rental car, intent on fleeing into the blizzard. But before he could even reach the driver's door, 2 unmarked black SUVs roared up the driveway, their high beams pinning him in a blinding spotlight. 2 armed federal agents stepped out into the freezing snow, their badges gleaming against their tactical jackets. Caleb Sterling, Brooke Sterling, Special Agent Marcus Vance's voice echoed like thunder across the dark, snow-covered yard. FBI, stay where you are. Hands where we can see them. Standing across the road behind his wooden fence, Hank Miller watched quietly in his heavy Carhartt coat, a cigar burning between his lips, as the handcuffs clicked around my son's wrists. The trap had sprung. The illusion was shattered. And on the icy threshold of the home he tried to steal, my son's empire of lies crumbled into complete and absolute ruin. April had finally arrived in Chicago, bringing a gentle, thawing warmth that slowly chased away the brutal Midwest winter. I sat quietly on the high-rise balcony of my newly leased luxury apartment on the 20th floor, wrapping my hands around a steaming cup of dark black coffee. Below me, the blue-green waters of the Chicago River glinted softly under the spring sunlight, winding gracefully through the steel and glass horizon of the city skyline. On the small glass table beside me rested Clara's framed photograph, her timeless smile catching the morning light. For the first time in 6 agonizing months, my lungs expanded fully, and a profound, unshakable sense of inner peace washed over my soul. The house on Lake Michigan was gone, transformed into a safe, joyful haven for Major Thomas Harris and his growing family. My life savings, along with every single dollar from the $920,000 all-cash sale, rested securely inside the untouchable vault of my private living trust. The heavy digital shadow cast by my son and daughter-in-law had been completely erased. The wheels of federal justice were turning steadily without any need for my intervention. At precisely 10 a.m., the sleek black smartphone resting next to Clara's photo began to vibrate. The caller ID displayed an automated restricted number, Cook County Department of Corrections. Inmate collect call. I took a quiet breath, picked up the phone, and pressed the green button. "This is an automated call from a correctional facility," a mechanical operator voice announced flatly. "Press 1 to accept charges." I pressed 1, set the phone to my ear, and waited in silence. "Dad?" Caleb's voice came through the receiver, but it was barely recognizable. The smooth, arrogant, polished tone he had used while pacing my kitchen was completely gone. In its place was the raw, broken, desperate rasp of a terrified 33-year-old man locked in a concrete cell. "I'm here, Caleb," I replied softly, my voice as calm and steady as the deep river below. A heavy, jagged sob erupted from his throat, echoing through the static of the prison phone system. "Dad, please, you have to help us." Brooke lost her job at Chase. The bank fired her the instant the federal indictment dropped. They set our bail at $150,000 cash each because of the aggravated identity theft and wire fraud charges. We don't have a single dime, Dad. The public defender told us we're facing a mandatory minimum of 5 to 8 years in federal prison. I listened quietly, watching a tourist boat drift peacefully down the river, saying nothing. Dad, please. Caleb wept hysterically, his breath catching in his chest. I know I ruined everything. I know I lied to you and tried to steal the house. But you have the trust money now. You have the $900,000 from the sale. Please use a fraction of it to post our bail. Or call the FBI field office and tell them it was all a giant family misunderstanding. Tell them you authorized the loans. If you drop the charges, we can fix this. Please, Dad. Don't leave your only son to rot in a federal pen. I closed my eyes briefly, letting his desperate pleas hang in the cold air between us. The pain of hearing my child beg from a jail cell tore at the deepest fibers of my heart, but the lesson I had forged over the last 6 months held firm. Caleb, I spoke slowly, placing every word like a heavy granite block in a permanent wall. I cannot post your bail, and I will not lie to the federal government to erase the crimes you and Brooke freely chose to commit. Dad, please, how can you be so cold? He wailed. I am not cold, Caleb, I answered, my tone dripping with a profound, solemn dignity. I am your father. I loved you from the very second you took your first breath, and I will continue to love you until the day I take my last. But love does not mean allowing myself to be destroyed so that you can escape the consequences of your own choices. You didn't just steal my money. Caleb, you violated my home, you poisoned my tea with sedatives, and you planned to throw me into a cheap nursing home so you could run away to Atlanta. I was desperate, Dad, he choked out. Desperation is an explanation, Caleb, not an excuse, I replied firmly. If I pay your bail and cover up your federal crimes today, I wouldn't be saving you. I would be enabling your destruction. Real fatherly love sometimes means closing the door, stepping back, and letting the law teach you the lessons of accountability that I clearly failed to teach you as a young man. You will serve your time, you will face the court, and when you come out of that prison years from now, broke and humble, I will still be your father. But you will re-enter the world as a man who understands that dignity, boundaries, and honor are not negotiable. Silence stretched over the line, heavy and absolute. Caleb wept quietly in his cell, unable to find another word of manipulation to break my resolve. Hire a good public defender, Caleb, I said softly. I'll be praying for your soul. Dad, wait. I gently tapped the red button, ending the call with a quiet click. I set the phone back down on the glass table next to Clara's photograph, picked up my coffee, and looked out over the sunlit cityscape of Chicago. The air was crisp, clean, and filled with the promise of a fresh start. Protecting myself hadn't made me cruel. It had restored my dignity as a father and a man. Thank you for following this journey on Dad's ultimate payback. If Arthur Sterling's story taught you that true love requires unshakable boundaries, please hit the like button, leave your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of quiet strength and family justice. Remember, standing up for yourself isn't vengeance, it's self-preservation. See you in the next episode.